Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our Fireside chat with Des Traynor. We're so excited to have you here for another Underscore Core Collective series. Our Core Collective series are a string of events really aimed at uncovering and sharing collective learnings from our Underscore Core community. So that you're able to join us for this one today. A little background on Underscore. We are a community-driven early-stage venture capital firm, and we really back founders from seed to Series A, predominantly in the B2B SaaS space with an emphasis on building here in Boston. What's unique about Underscore is that we really recognize that capital is a commodity, so we provide founders what they really need, which is a community of proven experts aligned to their unique needs. We call this community the Underscore Core, and through the core, we're able to provide founders with the right expertise, from the right people at the right time, and it's all at zero cost to founders and with a reward for our core members. So excited to introduce our Underscore co-founder and partner, Michael Scott, who will share more information on this event.
Thanks, Jenny. It's great to be here with everybody this morning. I'm particularly excited to have Danny Crichton as my co-moderator to work with Des Traynor. Des is somebody I got to see actually in action many years ago when he was early in the business of building Intercom as a co-founder there. And Danny and I are going to have some fun chatting to him about the experience of doing that. And we've got a simple goal, which is to give everybody here as founders the chance to learn from this very inspirational story, because he's literally been there since the get-go, figuring out what it was that people needed, and then figuring out how to build that into a product, and then doing what very few people do, which is scaling that into a company that's now about $150 million business. So you'll be, I'm sure, not only excited to hear that story, but hopefully getting some inspiration along the way about the various different stages we have to go through. And Danny's got some wonderful questions lined up for it. So without further ado, let me give a bit of background on these two and get you introduced to the basis for our discussion today. So first of all, Des, for those of you who don't know, is a co-founder of Intercom, but now leads their R&D organization. And he oversees their product strategy too. He speaks about growth and product strategies at conferences worldwide, as I mentioned, where I first met him, where we're both speaking at one of these events. And he's also the host of Intercom on Product podcast. Prior to Intercom, by the way, he also co-founded and worked at a company called Exceptional in UX design. So he's one of those rare people who's also got that design experience, which we often talk about as being so critical. And then I'm really excited today to have Danny, who has that broad background. He's managing editor at TechCrunch, where he covers tech, power, and startup growth. But much more importantly, he's got this background that covers everything from VC to reporting. He was TechCrunch based in Seoul. He was a VC at GC in Palo Alto, and also even at CRB in Boston. So we can consider him a Boston-based guy from his roots, at least. So great to have you here, Danny, and looking forward to working with you. So
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. And Des, before I get too far into any of this, I want to just give you a chance to introduce yourself by telling us a little bit about Intercom and what is it for those who don't know it, what should they know about it, and what do you do? And then I'll jump in with the first question and lead on to you, Danny.
Sure, and thank you for inviting me, Michael. It's great to be here with Danny as well. Intercom is a customer relationship platform where you basically talk to your customers and your customers can talk to you. We started building it in 2011 within our previous product, Exceptional, actually, as you mentioned, specifically because we had thousands of customers, but we were just 4 people based in Dublin. And actually, we were so divorced from our customers in a sense. There was a single street in San Francisco where we had more customers than we did in all of Ireland. So we wanted a better way to talk to them. And we started building this idea of a little messenger that you could put into your product. And very quickly, we realized that messenger was actually a bigger idea than the product it was sitting in. And it grew up to become Intercom. Today, it's a sales, marketing, and customer support platform where people, like internet businesses from like Amazon through to like dozens of tiny Y Combinator startups or Underscore startups, use us to talk to their customers, get to know them, reach out to them inside the product, give them guided tours of their product, and provide just general customer support. We announced recently we just crossed 150 million in revenue. 30,000 customers, 600 people. So it's been quite a journey from 4 people in 2011 to where we are today.
Yeah, and quite a journey from being part of another company where you decided you might need a feature to help you to figuring out how to build that into a whole business.
Absolutely, yeah. The whole the phrase that people use all the time in VC, as you're probably well familiar, is that's a feature, not a product. Well, this is actually a feature that turned out to be a product. Yeah.
Well, and more than that, it turned out to be a company because of what you did with it, which I think is very exciting. And I think Daniel drill into some of that. I'm going to start with just one question, and actually, there's a potential number of questions that come out of it, but I'll let you tee it up however you see fit. The number one thing that our product core is interested in at the moment is product market fit. Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling that's never going to go away because there's no such thing as being done with product market fit.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I'll tee this question up and I'll let you tell your story a little bit to get us going. First of all, I'm really interested to understand how you define product market fit. How did you know when you'd achieved it? If you did feel you'd ever achieved it, was there a sort of an aha moment where you felt like, wow, okay, we're achieving something here that really needs to be built on? Any notable stages during that process and tools, etc.? And I think Daniel jumped in some of that on the tool side. And then I think, again, in terms of how you measure it, there are lots of people who are doing particular sort of frameworks to try to measure it. I'm very keen on what Rahul Vora's done, for example. I think that's very smart. And then, now as you are building this company at scale, how do you maintain it? And when you think about your scale and size, how do you stay, focused on keeping it and developing, obviously, what is the ongoing growth? So I realize that's an entire hour-long conversation, but we'll find time to follow up with you to turn that into a Startup Secrets thing. But for now, just get us going and tell us a little bit about that journey.
A nice little 17-part question to get started.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I'll give you like the practical answer as to how it happened in Intercom, and then I also like invest in other startups and do advise other founders, and I kind of guess I have more perhaps abstract or repurposable advice that maybe will resonate with them. Within Intercom, we started off building Intercom for ourselves, as evidenced by the fact that we were building it inside a previous product. So our entire goal was solve our own problem, which was let make it easy for us to talk to our customers and for our customers to talk to us. And that looked like building a messenger into the product. And then after we built the messenger, it was like, well, what else should we do? We should let the customers reply. We should be able to send messages. We should send messages to some people, but not all people. And all of those. So we just kept pulling many different threads. And genuinely, because it was like a lot of self-design, as in we were intimately aware of the problems we had as a SaaS company with Exceptional. And we were very growing and increasing confidence that Intercom was a solution here. So I don't mean this to sound in any way like confident or arrogant, but it was like the first 10 features were kind of quite obvious, and we knew as we were building they were going to be popular. We got maybe one or two missteps, and we can talk about how we killed features off at various points. But genuinely, it was because like every single pain point customers would say to us, we also had, like I said, if a customer doesn't see it when they're in the app, kind of fall back to being an email. And we're like, yeah, we want that too. And by the way, this still happens even today in Intercom. I'm still getting customer requests for things that we have built a background hack around that we just need to productize. So it's like, there's still a lot of self-design that happens, which is solve your own problems. The brilliant thing about solving your own problem, if you really truly know the problem and you're not a rare, unique creature such that you're the only one like you, is that you can kind of skip a lot of steps. And I don't mean to say you can totally bypass user research or anything, but the idea of market discovery, get out of the building, talk to 10 customers, all that sort of stuff. When you know exactly what you're trying to do, you can kind of skip stages 1 through 5, and nearly like your first stage is almost design. It's not like discovery, meet the market, learn the customers, understand the needs. You're through all that. So for us, it was like we had a big problem to solve for ourselves, and then it was probably maybe a year in when we started getting, say, B2C customers, like people who weren't like us, but also saw a lot of value in what we were building. And that was the first point where I was like, this is something that we don't need that we're about to build. That's an interesting sort of fork in the road. And that was, and in general, like your hit rate is a lot lower when you're building things you don't fully understand. And that's when we had to start forming like user research teams and all, and like just product management became much more of a serious discipline as opposed to sort of a mental autocomplete. So that was kind of, and then in terms of how did we know, I remember like, one of the things I'm a huge believer in is like always talking to your customers. Like I really firmly believe, it's a trite message, so I won't say it for too long, but like,
well,
I'm still shocked.
You enable it.
Yeah, for sure. No joke, right? Like, but the amount of startups that still come to me were like, well, we're not sure if we should do option A or option B. And I'm like, well, what did your customers say? We're like, well, we haven't asked them.
Exactly.
And I'm like, that's like the most obvious first step. So, so I do remember talking to kind of half a friend, sort of professional contact, who had just installed Intercom. And we had myself and Owen, who was our CEO. We had like a 1 hour Skype call with him, and the call opened and there was no like, hey, nice to see you, haven't seen you in a while, how's that event, blah, blah. It was just like, dude, this thing's awesome. Here's the first problem I have. Here's three other things. I've been like talking to my customers all day. This is amazing. I've got 7 feature requests. I've itemized them here. And I was just like, whoa. Like I realized that we were clearly hitting into a really deep vein of demand. And then after that, it just became, we were running a closed beta, but we had like 1,000 signups, 1,000 people waiting. And this is back when running a closed beta wasn't cool. I think I remember we were #1 on Hacker News, the YC news forum. And it was just like everyone clearly understood the problem and everyone clearly wanted the solution. And, nothing was more obvious. When we started charging, like literally everyone started paying. Like, well, like they didn't feel like, oh, well, let me look at my options. It was like we were clearly the only show in town. So like it was a combination, I guess, of self-design plus intense customer feedback was what kind of convinced us like this thing is real. The only thing we didn't have a great grip on was like how big was it?
Yeah.
Because our language at the time for describing it is similar to what we would say today. Our mission is to make internet business personal. We want to make it easy for every business and every customer to talk. But like a VC like yourself, and some of my best friends are VCs, they're kind of looking to say some version of like, are you a CRM or are you a marketing tool? Because I have a playbook for each of these. I need to fit you into one of these holes. And we're like, well, we're kind of used for sales, marketing, and support. And we also have live customer records, and we can tell you who's doing what. And there's a little bit of analytics in there. And, we've got this map where you can see where all your customers are. And like that, you can just imagine, like, especially in 2011, when this wasn't a common space, VCs were just like, tell me what's the play here? Like, are you going to be Salesforce? And we're like maybe, it was tricky whilst we knew we had product market fit, I guess we didn't know what market in a sense, like as in we knew we had like product founder and product early stage startup fit for sure. Yeah. But yeah. And then today, the way I think about it genuinely is like if a company's looking for investment or advice, what I look to see is like, do you have like, there's just this like the idea of like, do you have a cluster of demand? So as in a load of people who are roughly similar, looking for roughly the same thing, using your product in roughly the same way, and are they ideally willing to spend a non-trivial amount of money to get the job done? And I think there's a few different things that framing, and I don't have a great I don't have like a Rahul style like metrics for each of these, but what I would say is like, you need a cluster of people and a good way to get to them. So as in your marketing needs to be scalable. It needs to be like, hey, there's one way you can get to all these people. It's called social networks, or they're all hotels, or they're all this, or they're all dentists, or whatever. But you need a sort of, can you draw a ring around these people and say, that's where they are. And here's how we're going to reach them. And here's how they're going to sign up. And here's what they're going to buy. And here's what they're going to use. Most startups that get the illusion of success, I think what happens is it all kind of unbundles. Like they have like 9 different ways of acquiring customers because they don't actually have one, if you know what I mean. And then they have like 12 different use cases because they haven't found one real one. So some people use it as a blogging platform. For other people, you're an internal doc. For other people, you're a wiki. For other people, you're this. But there's no 2 customers that use you the same way. And like that in and of itself doesn't mean you're going to struggle, but it does mean like you're going to end up having to build a tremendous amount of software and struggle to extrapolate maximum value from each piece you build. Like in the dream world, you've like one feature, everyone uses it, it's the only feature, and everyone uses it the same way. Like that, you have a really small technical footprint and a really large revenue base, right? My fear for a lot of startups is they get a kind of like false signs of hope because they just keep adding. So they're like, hey, I don't like your online commerce store, but you know what I'm looking for? I'm looking for a time tracking app. And they're like, well, you're going to love this. Meet the online commerce store, the first one that has a time tracking app embedded. And like, that's like, you're totally diluting your core offering just to kind of chase any customer. And I think that's the thing I look out for most, is that just consistency in like channel of demand, type of customer, type of use case, usage of features and feature patterns. And then obviously like, if for a slightly more mature startup, when it comes to measuring it, like the first area you usually look is some version of net dollar retention. Like, are people like buying it and sticking around? I'll stop there and see where we want to go.
Well, I just want to make sure that we capture what you said, because it's so powerful, before we move on and let Danny drill into some of the critical areas of this. We talk about this often in the startup world as MVP. The truth is that MVP is meaningless without what you said, which is figuring out what is the minimum viable segment, we call that an MVS, that actually intersects with that product capability you have. And the tinier that those two things start, and the more they intersect on a single line of customers that have the same need, and that's the key thing that you were saying there.
Yeah.
But use the same MVP over and over again. The more your MVS is going to enable you to, as your point, get focused on those customers and serve them in the same way, reach them in the same way, support them in the same way, etc. So I thought it was very well said. So MVP, MVS, we'll talk about that in greater detail another time. But thanks for outlining that.
No problem.
Let me hand over to you, Danny. You've got plenty of experience with talking to founders about what it's like to go from these first starting points. And I know you've got a number of questions on the product, metrics, tools, etc. What's a good starting point for Des to share with us how his story is relevant to others?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to zoom in a little bit. So you talked about increasing confidence over time when you were building out the product, but obviously, the clients you were working with had a lot of problems, right? This happened to be one of them. There are probably others. How did you sort of go down this route versus some of the other alternatives you could have looked at the time?
Yeah, I think initially we were focused on this idea of communication, just how businesses and customers communicate. And we ended up having near philosophical conversations about what is a communication from a business to a customer. And if you consider the range of things, the range of communications to be the fully transactional, here is your reset password link or whatever, right? That is in some sense a communication from a business, but it's not, it's not certainly not something, it's not a brand building opportunity, right? And then on the other extreme, you actually have, let's say, a note from the CEO about a new product launch or something like that. We had to kind of chop and sort of say, which pieces of communication do we want to do? And the honest answer was, we were well, where does personal help? Because the whole idea of Intercom was make internet business personal. And we looked at things like, say, surveys, we looked at research, we looked at transactional messaging, etc. And in the early days, we were no, personal helps when it's customer support, when it's customer engagement or success, and when it's sales. That's when having a human is valuable. So that was kind of our first significant scoping decision, if you like, right? We were sort of right, this much and no more. And actually, honestly, that has lasted us the best part of a decade, that decision. And one of the reasons we were confident in doing that was we worked with a group called the Rewired Group, who they're kind of the pioneers of this technique called jobs to be done, which is a sort of customer research and task research method. And we worked with them to interview, I think, 100 customers for an hour each. Oh, wow. And with each of those, we were just all questions we were asking is what happened in your life such that you signed up for Intercom? What did you think Intercom would do for you? Did it do that? If it didn't do that, why not? Why do you still use Intercom? Or if you recently quit, why did you quit? If you're on trial, what's your evaluation criteria for trial? And we just zoomed in on all that, and we came back with these three areas of, I'm trying to grow sales. I'm trying to grow sales is one area. Like I said, people are on my website and I want to get them. Another area was people are signing up and they're quitting. Like I said, they sign up, click around, close the browser, and they're gone. And that's engagement. And then lastly, we're doing support and it's not working. It's creaking. We're getting hundreds of tickets. Our customers are unhappy. We just want to be able to talk to them, please. So that was the big scoping decision that led us to say those areas is where we want to invest most. And it ultimately comes back to the idea that human helps.
And when you talk about all this different feedback, so that's the qualitative feedback. You did these, user interviews, you did aggregated them. Then on the quantitative side, you sort of mentioned net dollar retention rate. Yeah. What metrics did you use to show that you were doing something successfully, and have those changed over time as Intercom grew?
In terms of, so at the early days, we went a year without charging, and then when we did charge, we were charging a flat fee of $50. $50, if you're IBM with 500 people, who are a customer, or $50 if you're a scrappy YC startup. And we had this classic one size fits none problem where we were too expensive at the low end and way too cheap at the high end. Customers were churning off us because they couldn't get purchase approval for products as cheap as us. That was genuinely a concern. So as a result, net dollar retention wasn't really a thing because there was no expansion. So we could look at gross revenue retention, but honestly, to be totally candid, we weren't that sophisticated back then. The thing that Intercom is fundamentally about, the way we derive make internet business personal into numbers is basically how many businesses are using us, how many conversations are they having, and with how many end users. And we track those figures. I think end users is 1 to 2 billion. I don't know what our latest figure is, but somewhere in that range of people who interact with Intercom. Businesses, as I said earlier, is 30,000 or so. And conversations, again, I don't know the actual figure, but I'm going to get somewhere around 500 million a month or something like that. I think it is our latest sort of published figure anyway. And they're the sort of three core metrics that we kind of care about from a point of view of, are we achieving our mission? And actually, they were the things that we focused on a lot back then, which is just everything we do should either get us more customers, start more conversations, or attract more end users for our customers. And we worked across those three, and they were the master analytics. So if we were building a new tool, like let's say, we're going to make it possible to email your customers, the only reason we do that is to increase the number of conversations, maximize the number of end users, and make us attractive to more businesses. And that was kind of our measures of success back then. Obviously today, as a 9-year-old company with hundreds of millions of revenue, it's a lot more fancy, but we started off pretty basic, and that was what but I do think the value there for us was aligning the metrics to the mission was really important, because it kind of gave everyone clarity on what we're actually trying to do without becoming a team that's motivated only by bumping metrics, if you know what I mean, without being able to tie, because NDR is an important metric, but it's not an inspirational one. You have to kind of do a bit of hijinks or linguistic gymnastics to make sure that people care about NDR, because they have to realize, it means people love us. Oh, okay, but
right.
But yeah, it's not, it alone is not a great North Star,
Exactly. Well, I have a question. So, I mean, Intercom actually has a couple of different types of users that use the platform, right? So you actually have your customers, the businesses that are installing Intercom on their website. And then you have the end users, the actual customers of your customers who are, talking with those customers. And then you also have a platform play today in which you also have developers using Intercom. So I'm curious, in some cases there's tension, right? One of your customers might want to, habitually ping their own customers in a way that kind of turns them off from the platform. How do you balance, different types of users, particularly when they conflict with each other's objectives?
Yeah, so we have a whole team called Trust and Safety, which is specifically about this. And generally speaking, the developers, in terms of conflicting demands, the developer audience is rarely the problem. As in, they just want more access to more functionality so that they can build more and better stuff. And for the most part, resource constraints aside, we're happy to do that. Where we struggle is there are things that either customers want to do to businesses or businesses want to do to customers that are not mutually beneficial, let's say, right? So you could imagine how Intercom could be used to spam. And that's what our team Trust and Safety spends a lot of time doing. We have all of these insane levels of trigger alerts. Like if you sign up for Intercom, you can't immediately send a million emails or whatever. You have to go through a sort of process. We try to isolate our customers, whitelisted IP by whitelisted IP, so that if one person really messes up, they don't do damage to anyone else. Then on the end user side, there are things here's an interesting philosophical one. If I'm on your website and you want to play a noise in my browser, whose decision is that? And we dance around this one quite a bit, because in some sense it should be an end user preference. In another sense, it's a business preference how interruptive they want to be. It's not on us to impose our own business philosophy on our customers, in a sense. It's not the case that to use Intercom you have to believe everything Intercom believes. It's just you'll probably have a better experience the more of it you believe, if you know what I mean. But so frequent examples would be I don't want any more pop-ups. I don't want to see this message again. I want to unsubscribe. I want to get out of this. I want to get out of that. Where the customers want that, and to the degree that it helps trust and safety, we will do it. But oftentimes the businesses don't want that, because it's you're going to block one of my core ways of interrupting my users, and we're we know that's the point. So there's a eternal conflict there. The thing that we always have to, one of the key ideas about Intercom is for the longest time, we've always designed Intercom for both sides of the conversation. And that's kind of why it works. We design a great, a sort of WhatsApp-y, Facebook Messenger style interface for end users to use, because that's what they're familiar with. And we try to make that as rich as possible. So it means you can do things like paste images, use GIFs, use emoji. And then on the business side, we have to design an entire business conversations tool, which is our inbox, right? The challenge here is it's hard to design the right thing for all people on both sides, and we end up making a lot of things optional. So you can turn off file attachments, you can turn off GIFs, you can turn off emoji, you can turn off all of those things. I think the message I always try to push on our businesses is the more you can treat your customers like humans and do what they want to do, the better long-term game you'll be playing. But I do acknowledge in the short term that can often be detrimental. And if you're a publicly traded company, you can't afford a 0.2% drop in some, say, onboarding metric even if it comes at the cost of pissing off 99.98% of people, that 0.02% shows up in the charts, you know. So like you do have that sort of tension back and forth, and we do our best. We have like a whole, you know, obviously customer success team who does our best, and we have customer education as well, who do our best to advise on best practices. And we do make the point about time horizons, about like, you know, what's good in the long term isn't might look not great in the short term, and vice versa. Yeah, so I'll stop there, but that's kind of how we think about it.
That's great. I actually want to follow up on the education comment. So I was interviewing Andy Ratcliffe, the CEO and founder of Wealthfront, earlier this week, and he said that they don't educate their customers. In fact, it's by policy they don't educate their customers. If a customer does not show up already pre-educated to use Wealthfront, they're not going to convert, and there's therefore no, you know, there's no value in spending time with them. I'm curious from your perspective, because obviously Intercom's not just a product; it is in some ways a philosophy of how to treat customers, handle this sort of model. How much do you educate customers, and how much investment are you willing to do that?
I'd say it's opt-in for starters. Like, and you don't have to get the education. Generally speaking, where people end up with, so we have like an Intercom university, we have an interconnected sort of network where you can join in and talk to other users of the product as well. Generally speaking, what happens is someone starts a question which is never about how do I use Intercom, because like how do I use Intercom, like the point and click piece is pretty easy, like it's a send mail button, that's how you send a mail or whatever, right? The stuff that's hard is how do I get the most out of Intercom, and that's usually what the question they're asking is, and that's where the education piece comes in. And like if someone asks us how to get the most in Intercom, our answer isn't spam the loving shit out of your customers, right? Our answer is like treat your customers with dignity and respect, and let them opt into things and opt out of things and all that sort of stuff. That's the actual answer. But some people will realize, hey, well, I don't want to do that. I want to push 10 pop-ups on the page. Now, we do our best to throttle that and make that hard to do and publish warnings. But ultimately, we're a communication system. We can't stop people from doing the things they want to do. Like there's a famous phrase a friend of mine used, which is like, you know, you can't stop someone from pushing beans up their nose if they really want to. And I never understood. I never really understood what he meant.
One of those Irish metaphors,
I guess it is. Like it's actually by a guy from Boston, Jared Spill. But
it's Beantown. We got to have some.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, I think like the gist of the point is basically like you can do lots of work to stop people from taking missteps, but at some point that work just becomes negative, and like the ROI of going an extra step further and often like punishing everyone else because of the way in which this one person might misuse a feature is actually just detrimental entirely. So like we go so far as we can in terms of educating what we believe to be best practice. And to be clear, best practice for us also means the best way to grow your business. It's not like some hippie shit. Like it's genuinely, we want you to succeed, but we want you to succeed in a way that is customer like friendly, in a way that's like long-term customer sustainable as well. So that's what we do. But yeah, it is a challenge, and I don't think it's not unique to us in the sense in that I'm sure like folks running social networks have problems. Like, well, we can throw in more ads or we can put more viral feedback loops in. At some point, people are going to get addicted to our product, and that at some point that's going to turn against us. There'll be media backlash, etc. We've seen that play out loads of times. Our version of that is just like, how can we encourage our businesses to do the most long-term sustainable, successful thing for them? And that just happens to coincide usually with what's best for your customers.
You know, if I may, I'll just pick up on this because I think what you've raised, Danny, is awesome. And we promised to pick out some non-obvious points. And so, Des, I have a thought for you, which is, you're describing something which is very enabling. You're enabling people to actually get more sales from their customers and also to service those customers better. But you didn't talk about metrics for them, the end customer. In other words, what's driving their commerce business, or what's driving whatever business they're running? It's education, it could be media, it could be whatever it is. And if there's some way you could create a loop that gets the customer, the end customer, I think you sometimes call them your end users, to describe what their business success is as a result of Intercom, in terms of their, for example, getting better conversion rates, or they're enabling more students, or whatever it might be. I think one thing that would be really helpful is connecting those dots for your intermediate customers, because if they're enabling that, everybody's going to be happy.
So it's tangentially related, but like one thing you can do, or one thing we encourage you to do, again in the vein of best practices, when you're trying to send any message out of Intercom, so an outbound message, so different, when a customer is trying to reach in, generally speaking, we let them talk to you, as is good practice to run a business. But when businesses are trying to reach out to their customers, we have a goals framework where we ask, like, what is the core metric you're trying to affect here? And it could be like sessions, it could be signups, it could be like teammates, it could be files, photos shared, whatever is important to the business. And generally speaking, what we try to do is highlight the messages that are like high volume, low impact. So as in, you're mailing a million people about this, and 4 of them are like uploading new files as a result. That's a waste of 9, whatever, you know. So we do try to get people into that goal-driven mindset. In fact, our outbound framework is designed with the goal in mind. It's actually one of the first questions we ask you is like, what's this message supposed to do? And again, like, this is the sort of thing that, like, you know, not all businesses like this, because a lot of businesses are in, like, so if we ask you, what's your newsletter supposed to do? People are like, oh, why do you ask me this question? It's my job. I just have to do it. And you're like, right, but like, we need you to tell us something about what you think this is going to do. And is it just open rates? That's fine, whatever it is, but like, or clicks or whatever. But like, we want to know what people are doing. And the question alone kind of puts manners on people, because it forces people to not phone it in from a marketing strategy point of view of just like, well, I guess everyone sends an email on day one. We're like, why? You know, and like, I will say, like, when we started in Intercom, we weren't this clear. Our messaging wasn't as clear on this, and we did probably advocate for, like, just talk to your customers under any terms. And generally, like, it's not a bad idea, but you can get a lot more specific and get a lot more reward.
Yeah, and what's great about what you just shared is, if you can ask why and ask it for the outcomes of your end customers, everybody's going to figure out how to achieve that over time.
Yeah. I mean,
and they're going to be connected to it.
Yeah, one whole, like, there's posters and all sorts of stuff in Intercom all on the phrase outcomes, not outputs. Because I think, like, so many jobs and so many roles are measured entirely on what they output, but actually it's the business impact that actually matters.
Yeah. Back to you, Daniel. I didn't mean to interrupt that thread there.
No, absolutely. For those on the live stream, we are taking questions. We'll get to those in just a second. So if you have them, definitely put them into the chat window. But I want to pivot the conversation a little bit to just tooling. Des, obviously, you come from a design UX background. You know, and you're continuing to do that today. What does your tool set look like? What do you use personally? What do you use in order to monitor the company, the dashboards, the design tools?
So personally, I probably spend too much of my life in this sort of G Suite. Now, there's no massive thinking behind that, but it's just, you know, it's the Microsoft Word of 2020 or whatever, right? I have been loving pitch.com, the new presentation design online thing. I was historically a Keynote user because I do a lot of presentations, but Pitch looks really, really good. Then from an Intercom perspective on internal documentation, we have 2 solutions, and we use and advocate both equally. Notion is our intranet, and it's basically the source of truth for all company-wide things, basically anything that dictates how Intercom works the company. So everything from our people processes, our holidays, company values, company handbook, all that sort of stuff is all well documented inside Notion. And then from an R&D perspective, where we get into like road mapping and like goal, task set, frameworks, all that sort of stuff, we use a tool called Coda. You probably heard about them. They just raised a bunch of money yesterday. We've been using Coda for about 2 or 3 years, but Coda is a tool that's it's almost like a database. A database, a spreadsheet, and a Google Doc kind of had a child in a sense, because it lets you write documents that source data from other places. So as an example, all of our roadmaps are in Coda, but also all of our team are in Coda. We have 600 people entries, if you like, and you can merge these things together to write a document that says, like, Peter from the messages team is working on this initiative, and like linking each of these things to the right person, and it is due on this date, and that date is part of our launch calendar. Peter is part of our org chart. The messages team is part of our org chart. It's all interconnected. So that's how we run things from an R&D perspective. And then on the like the more I guess boring infrastructural stuff, we're like pretty much Amazon top to bottom in terms of how Intercom is deployed across like 300 servers, and you know, we spend, I guess, tens of millions with Amazon. From a design perspective, I think we're all in on Figma primarily, and then since we've gone remote, we've moved to Miro quite a bit, the real-time whiteboard tool. I think, I mean, there's probably a dozen other tools that we use that I'm not aware of. I'm just scanning my kind of icons are in front of me here. But yeah, so yeah, that's kind of a brief pass of what we work on.
And then my last question here before we open up to some more from the audience is, I want to talk about hiring. I mean, obviously you started with 4 folks, now you're 600. You've had to grow enormously over the last decade. You're still leading the product org and the research org. What does that look like today from a hiring perspective? I mean, how did you change hiring over time, who you select? How do you find the kinds of folks that are right for Intercom?
Yeah, and those types of folks change over time as well. It's worth calling out as well. I think early on, like every single startup I know of goes through their network. And for most startups, their network is all the startups that they started with that didn't work out. They try and get all those people in. And that's certainly one of the core ways we succeeded. We were in Dublin anyway, we were in an incubator called Dogpatch, which was by a Boston-based VC, Polaris, I think, at the time. And they basically were running a little studio of sorts. And we ended up hiring like maybe 7 or 8 people out of that after Intercom kind of broke out. I think in general, at the startup stage, everything is so insanely messy, badly planned, non-structured, that you just need people who are comfortable with chaos. And to give you an example, like we hired one of my friends, Peter, in the mystical example earlier, is actually a real person. And I remember he sent me a mail about 2 months in to say some version of the following. Like, he's like, I'm loving it here. Like, really like enjoying getting through really fast progress and all that. Just one small thing. How do I get paid? And like, that's the sort of that's the sort of chaos that like you need to be comfortable with. And you can totally, and like that sounds bad, and it was bad, to be clear. It was just like, but that's just an oversight. That's the sort of shit that happens like when you're all just all in building a product, if you like. Today, obviously, it's a lot more structured. We capture your payment details when you sign. But like, I think early on, you need people who are willing to tolerate the sort of craziness of startup life. There is craziness, and it's mostly because of lack of structure. It's mostly because of a bunch of people doing things they've never done before at a scale they've never done it before at, while having folks like Michael throw millions of dollars at them. It's like, it's, you know, it doesn't end well, you know. So like, you have to kind of really invest in building a company culture that can kind of like can move from the sort of chaos factory towards something that is actually stable and predictable. And in doing that, you need to hire like more experienced people. And then once you kind of have like a steady operating rate where you can kind of say, hey, this is a predictable company, like things work the way you expect they would work, then you can start hiring, like, if you like, folks who aren't like startups through and through. And that's the real sweet spot, because then you get the super experienced people who've been around and they can tell you what the future problems are. They can see the road, they can see around corners, etc. So I think like early on, it was definitely network, and you're specifically looking for folks who are, at the very least in interview styles, you're looking for people who don't need insane levels of preparation because the company is just too young. You're like 8 people. You don't have a philosophy and a document for everything yet. Then once you start to grow up, you can start scaling. And then the biggest thing that I think people will get wrong is like, it's some version of levels and titling and like hiring senior people and not knowing what the org chart should look like, and not being willing to have difficult conversations when hey, it turns out we just, you know, Jenny just joined. She's way more experienced than Joey. We think Joey should report to Jenny, but Joey's been here forever. You need to kind of solve, you know, like every org chart I've ever seen of a startup has at least 1 or 2 like bugs in it where you're like, that's an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had at some stage, or we're just quietly hoping that this will go away by the person leaving or whatever. Like, that's the nature of the early stage mayhem. Once you, like today, as you'd guess, we have a whole recruiting team. We have a director of recruiting. We have recruiting philosophy. We have a go-to-market strategy for recruiting and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of like it's a different cadence. It's a different level of predictability. But I do think like the 2 things you can go wrong in a startup is like they're the inverse of the same problem. It's like not hiring people who are comfortable with the stage you're at, and then specifically if you're not willing to get to the stage that they are comfortable at. So so like if you're trying to hire like a super experienced COO when you're 5 employees, and this person's like, you know, right, like they're gonna be like, what the hell do I do here? Like, you know, and then the inverse can be true as well. If you have somebody who wants to start their own startup or wants to be really in on the ground floor, and you're offering them a position as an engineer on a team, in a group, in an org, in a subset of a function, they're not going to like it because like, you know, you need some process and to have a reliable outcomes for your business. And they're going to find that incredibly inhibiting. They should go and join a 4-person company where they can do whatever the hell they want. You know, so that's I think the philosophical aspect of recruiting. Yeah.
Great.
I want to make sure we, Danny, I was just going to say we probably should move to questions that are coming in. I see one from it's Dr. Manhattan. I heard about the Intercom 666 framework for aligning product groups on strategy and tactics. Have you ever updated this framework? Why and why not?
So the 666 framework, just for what it's worth, we have updated it. Intercom used to work in 6-week cycles, 6-month plans, and 6-year strategies. That was the plan, basically. So 6 weeks was up. We expect absolute certainty. There were like, whatever happens in the next 6 weeks, this is the plan. And if some new iPhone launches or whatever, we'll deal with that in 6 weeks and a day, but not in the next 6 weeks. We still work like that today. That piece is still pretty much sacrosanct in Intercom. We work today. We work in quarters. Shock horror. Every quarter is broken into 2 cycles, and again, the 6-week cycle is still relatively sacrosanct. We don't break it because it's just quite unproductive to to work on a project. You need to build a lot of state and a lot of information in your head, and if someone comes along and says, "Hey, we're going to do this totally different thing," it's very, very churny. So the 6-week thing is still firm. We don't talk about 6 months anymore. We talk about quarters and years now. So that's how we work today. In general, like in Intercom, what we do is we have like a strategy for a given area. So we have a customer support strategy, which speaks to what we're going to build in customer support over the next 2 years. And that's our big bets, which are like, say, in some cases will be like, we're going to bet hard on automation, on AI, on workflows, and on teammate efficiency. They're the sort of 4 pillars of the strategy. And then each of those will have like a bundle of features that we think are important. And then when you get into the quarterly level, it's like, here's what we're definitely working on in this quarter, but the exact how far we get, we don't yet know. And then with the 6 weeks version, it's like, with pretty high degree of specificity, we think this will be in beta in 5 weeks and 3 days or whatever. That's how we work. I think you need to have short-term precision. It's also important for just measuring like how predictable your throughput is. Like you need to basically be able to say, like, can you tell me roughly what you'll get done in 6 weeks? And people need to be able to say yes, like barring any exogenous craziness. So we hold that in high regard, and it definitely works. And I think most startups work in some version of that. The quarterly plan is, like, these days, as you'd guess, we have a large sales team, we have a large marketing team. The roadmap is not R&Ds alone. We need to work with sales and see what our like most valuable customers are asking for. And as long as they're common needs that we all need, then we'll go and prioritize those things. We need to work with marketing to see what stories are going to be told, if you like. So as in, you need to give marketing stuff to launch, and it's hard to give them one of these like I have Newt and Toa Frog launches where it's like, we've fixed the issue in articles and we now have hyperlinks and you can change tags and upload images. It's Intercom 4, like it's like there needs to be like a cohesive story that you bring to market. Like we just did this yesterday. But like, so you need to partner with marketing on like, what is the product marketing that will actually bring this to life. And so as a result, the roadmap is decided between sales, marketing, and R&D. Obviously, we are probably the drivers of the sort of product vision, as you'd expect. But that's how we work. And so to answer the 666 question, I'd say it's 6 weeks is very valuable. I'd recommend it to anyone. For everything else, I'd say time horizon, there's some correlation between how long your company has been alive. The Lindy effect, I think they call it. How long have you been alive is usually a measure of how long you're going to be alive. So I hate seeing startups that have a 2-year product strategy, because I'm like, you're not going to be around for 2 years. Like you should assume you'll be dead pretty soon. But like at Intercom's level, it's reasonable to assume we'll be here in like 2023, 2025 or whatever. So it's not ridiculous to plan huge areas that might only see the light of day in like in 18 months, 2 years or whatever. In fact, a lot of what we'll be releasing a huge feature in September that's been about 18 months in the works. We would never have had the ambition to do that historically, because we're like, well, let's see if we get there, Whereas like now, I think when we've kind of crossed, if you like, that first chasm of survivability, we can kind of sort of see, well, it would take a pretty pathological set of circumstances for us not to be around to benefit from this feature. So let's work on it.
Well, one of the questions that's coming in here is related to this, actually, which is, obviously you've grown a couple of companies now, one that was a very different experience, and then this one that's really scaled. What was the experience that came between those two things that you would say is markedly changed, like different era or different size or different experience because of the customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think Intercom is a much bigger and frankly better idea than Exceptional was. So I think that's probably what fueled the growth. I'd just say a couple other thoughts though. One is like, when we were doing Exceptional, we were doing it in the sort of 37 signals / Basecamp model of running a consultancy and building this on the side, and then trying to do a bit of marketing and drum up a bit of buzz for this side project, while ultimately also trying to serve people who we were building software for as consultants. That massively inhibits your growth. It meant that Exceptional was for us like a 1 to 2 day a week type effort, while we were trying to actually like make money just to pay our own salaries, which were like very small at the time. So that's one reason. Bootstrapping definitely means going slower. And I also think that the niche we had chosen, which was a developer tool for Ruby on Rails developers, was like quite niche at the time. It's like funny. Genuinely, there are tools today that have raised $20-50 million off the back of the same idea, but the difference is Ruby on Rails is huge, developer tools is huge. PagerDuty and Pingdom have had good outcomes and all that sort of stuff. People are just getting used to the idea that like developers is a worthwhile market. GitHub is a $7 billion company. You know, that none of that was true. Like when we were doing Exceptional, GitHub was like the coolest kids in town for sure, but the idea that to be a $7 billion company was just batshit. You know, so I think like the landscape has definitely changed as well. And just generally, does this, like, I'm sure you see this more than me, Michael, but like, does this just general wave of just SaaS, like everyone, like, you know, like we still had to sell people in 2007, 8, 9 on the idea that they'd pay monthly for a piece of software. Like that's just the norm now. It's just totally the norm, but it wasn't back then. And people, it can be kind of easy to forget this. Like when we were building Intercom, like to give you like one example, like there was no way to push a message to your customers inside your product at all. If you wanted to email your customers, you'd use like Campaign Monitor or MailChimp. But here's the funny one. If you wanted to charge your customers, there was no native SaaS charging technology whatsoever. What you had to do was hack a version of PayPal to charge a recurring fee. And PayPal, believe it or not, didn't actually have the greatest APIs on earth. So that alone was like a messy process. Today, like you can single click start a business and be up and running with SaaS framework and without even writing code. So like I just think that the market demand today for new tools and the willingness to adopt them and the time to build them is just, you know, like many orders of magnitude better than it was in 7, 8, 9.
Well, Danny, there are some questions that are starting to come in, but I'd love to give you a chance to kind of flow from where you were and either weave those questions in or drive them directly. You can see them in the chat.
Yeah. No, Des, I'm curious. I mean, obviously, you've been doing this for almost a decade, and obviously with your previous company, you've had a lot of experience. How do you keep learning on the job? You know, what are the sources for developing yourself, learning more about the craft, building up your own expertise?
I think I've always done my best to chase down the smartest people I know, or the people whose thinking I'm most inspired by, and reading everything they write and trying to meet them and ask them questions and just generally get on their radar. Generally speaking, like, you know, people in technology, like it's not covered a lot, but people in technology tend to be really, really nice and tend to help each other a lot. Like as an example, you know, Michael has been very helpful to me over time, and I hope vice versa as well. So like I do think surrounding yourself, and not like in a physical sense, but just building the connections with people who you think you can learn a lot from is one whole thing that I take very seriously. And like that's like I will go out of my way to meet people or create opportunities where I think I could meet smart people or be part of a conversation where I'll definitely be the dumbest person in the room. It's the best place to be. And then the second thing I think is there's a perverse thing that happens, I think, with reading and books and stuff like that, where there's a sense that anything that's new is automatically correct, and anything that's old is obviously out of date. And actually, I think, you know, if you're willing to throw that aside, you can basically say, what am I most likely to learn from? I could look through all of history and look for the literal best books of all time that have stood the test of time. And I'd look at, say, Michael Porter's What is Strategy, which is a 1984 paper, I think, or something like that. A lot of Clay Christensen's early work are all things that have inspired me. Christopher Alexander is a famous designer, Bill Buxton at Microsoft. These are all people who are, like, in my opinion, savants who have, like, you know, genuinely pushed the industry forward in loads of ways. Like even like Bill Mogridge here, he's here beside me somewhere. Like this book is about the entire history of like design and interactions and all stuff. I read this all the time, even though like this talks about stuff like, you know, how to design a better mouse, like stuff that's kind of irrelevant today. You still learn so much from the depth of thinking. And I know
you're one of the first people to prove that you don't have a virtual background on. You can actually reach behind it and grab it.
Yeah, maybe it's a virtual book. But what I'd say is just like I think if you're willing to read stuff that wasn't just published, you can get really smart really quickly. If you insist on like whatever is just fresh off the tweets, you're really limiting yourself in a bad way, and you're learning shit that like is like unlikely to be useful. So to give you like a different example of the same thing, who are you more likely to learn from? The history and success of Apple or Microsoft or Amazon or LinkedIn, or pick your favorite tool, right? Or like who's hot right now. So like I don't want to pick in any given company, but like to take your favorite company that just got valued at like 10 billion or whatever, or just raised a big round or got bought or whatever, you can study them, but like there's not even a guarantee they're going to be successful. You know, like we could have, like, you know, again, like let's take Theranos because that's an easy one to attack, right? But like you could have like spent all your time studying how great this is and how they're ascent to power and trying to copy all that. Turns out it didn't work. I do worry about people who take too much inspiration from a 2020 starlit company, because I'm thinking, we know what happened in the Microsoft case. They worked out. They're now $1.5 trillion company. Like, that's not a bad outcome, right? We don't know what's going to happen to most of these companies, so let's not assume that everything they're doing is correct. Anyway, end of rant.
That's great. And I know we're coming up to the end of our time, but I'm curious. So obviously, when you start as a founder, you have a lot of hats. You can't take the hats off because there's literally no other person to give the hat to. But now you're 600 people. You're running a couple of different orgs within Intercom. How did you pick what you kept with you, what you gave to others, what you prioritize in your day to day? How did you pick
that? I think there is somebody better than me for everything in Intercom, and all I really do these days is try and feed context back and forth. I do think I'm a pretty good communicator, and I have a pretty good grasp of what we're trying to do. Like we have an SVP of product and we have a VP of engineering, and they run product engineering, and I don't really get in their way or get into their business. What I do is make sure that, like, there's a phrase that always sticks with me, which is like, if you want someone to make the same decision that you would make, they need to have all the information that you have. And I see that as my job, to be like a context machine. And I just constantly hydrate people with context so that they can grow and they can make increasingly better decisions. And that features in everything. It's like access to data. It's transparent. Like, we'll send the board deck around. We'll let everyone know everything that's going on. And from my point of view, like, the only actual area I have any alleged qualification in would be in the like R&D sort of product and engineering side of things. Like, I've dabbled in marketing and recruiting and like customer support and all that, but I've never actually I never learned how to do any of those things. I just did my best, and ultimately, hopefully, maybe I learned enough to hire somebody who would be a lot better than me. And I think that's what I've probably achieved, if anything, in all those other areas. I think today, like, I wouldn't swap roles with our head of engineering or head of product. I think they're better than me for the role. I think I'm possibly have a better vantage point to feed them the context. So that's probably how I ended up where I am. Like, I try to help translate what is our company strategy into like a product that will actually get us there. And that's probably, like, if I had a job, that's how I describe it.
Great. Well, I know we're almost out of time. So one last question. Obviously, a huge number of people in the product core here, probably in that space looking for product market fit. It's ambiguous. Everything's kind of hard. You're getting feedback. The feedback's contradictory. How do you find a path through that? What's your advice to folks directly in finding signal and all that noise?
I think you have to segment. That's like, we had a launch yesterday, and if it wouldn't take me too long, I'd love to screen share the feedback, because like, we literally have message after message. This is terrible. This is great. This is terrible. This is great. It happens. Like, that's the nature of the world. It's chaos. It's not like, we suffer from this type of physics envy where we think if you do a good thing, it's uniformly good, and a bad thing is uniformly bad, but it's just not. I think you have to segment, and you segment by a few different things. You look at, like, type of customer, so big, small, vertical, non-vertical, B2B, B2C, or whatever. What you're trying to find is, like, if something seems like it's all over the place, then you need to find out, like, it's just a sign you're aggregating too much. So you've put all your feedback into one bucket. Well, if you actually pour that bucket out and say, let's put all the B2B and B2C in different buckets, does that make more sense? No. Okay, let's try price points. Let's try 0 to 100, 100 to 500, whatever. Does that make more sense? No. Okay, let's try people who've used the feature and people who haven't. People who've used it more than once and people who haven't. And eventually what you'll find is there is an actual thematic, this technique, by the way, is called phenomenography. It's something I learned from my failed PhD days. But you keep going until you can actually find sense in the chaos. And what you'll find is there's always going to be a bit of chaos, but what you're trying to work out is, like, what's the sort of the commonalities, the statistically improbable invariance in what's going on in all this noise. And you're like, oh, it turns out the people that don't have the messenger installed in their product all hate this feature because we're showing them stuff that they can't see. Oh, okay, that's why they hate it. All right, and then you're like, right, now we can design bodies of work around fixing each of those things, or, like, indeed killing the feature if it turns out it was just an absolute fail. But I think, like, that's, like, feedback is noise until you segment it, and you have to keep segmenting until it makes sense. And then like, literally, unless you have, going back to the very first question, unless your users are, like, all over the place, like you've got, like, dentists and doctors and vets and lawyers all trying to use one time sharing product or something, unless that's your problem, you'll always find some sense. And if you can't find any sense, then it's quite possible you actually don't have product market fit, because it turns out if everyone hates it, that's good. It means you've done the wrong thing for all your customers. If everyone loves it, that's good. It's when it's all over the place and you can't explain it, that just means you've got too many different use cases or types of people. And so that's my advice on how to get through the noise. Don't accept, like, it's easy to be like, oh, well, users are kind of, they're weird. They're like, but there's always signal there, and you'll work it out if you just keep drilling.
That was a great final question, Danny. Thank you. It brought us nicely back around to the starting point that the customer core had wanted to learn about. And Des, I love your answer because, phenomenonography is now going to be one of my new words. I'm going to have to figure out how to spell it.
Yeah.
But what you were basically doing there was great, which was, you were literally micro-segmenting and you were extracting what effectively are things like attributes and trying to understand and make more and more sense by doing that. And we think that's a hugely smart thing to do. And it's usually what gets entrepreneur success is actually we use this term minimum viable segments, really narrowly defined very clearly so people can repeatedly go after. So I think we'll have a follow-up with you on that.
Awesome.
Let me take a moment to wrap for a second and say two things really strike me. One is some wonderful questions from Danny have exposed what I think very few founders have done, which is your ability to just grow and learn along the way, but be a total pragmatist. You don't get caught in what I would describe as the bureaucracy of startups. And I love the fact that you question everything, whether it's old wisdom or it's newfound genius. Because actually everything's different for every startup, and every person has to figure out why their situation is unique. And if it wasn't unique, you wouldn't be bringing anything new to the world. So I think you're a wonderful example of what we want to see more of and back more of in founders. Des, in wrapping up, is there anything you'd like to make sure you leave founders with as inspiration? Because you are inspiring naturally, but what's the one thing you'd like to say, hey guys?
If they're early stage founders, I'd say like the three things I say to everyone is basically like, build your product to talk to your customers. Anything you do beyond those two things is the biggest waste of time, and you have so little time. You're like, don't people talk about burn rate and runway. I'm like, don't forget it's also your life. That's the thing. Like it's not just 18 months of revenue or whatever, 18 months of a burn. It's also like 18 months of your entire life. So you're not fooling anyone. Even if you fool a VC, you're still fooling yourself. You know what I mean? Exactly. And then the other piece, which I'm sick saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. Don't forget to launch. I'm still shocked by companies that actually they spent so long terrified into like anxiety and fear that the market might reject them, that they decide the best way to deal with that is to never actually ask the market to accept them, never launch, and that way they never really failed. Except for they did, but so don't forget to launch. Like in the YC terms, it's like write code and talk to users, but please don't forget to launch. You can launch multiple times, you can have multiple goes, but there's a phrase people often say: 0 lives remaining. That idea that like you're only going to get like 2 or 3 shots at this startup thing. Don't waste one being afraid to launch your product, because you'll learn so much more doing that than you will sort of theorizing it in your head. Anyway, that's my kind of guidance.
Wonderful. I'll simply connect the dots to something we say often too, which is, we invest money, we can get that back. You invest your life, you can't.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think, failure to launch is so fundamental, and VCs are not a launch. Just because we give you money, that's not validation. In fact, oftentimes it's a mirage.
Yeah.
And finally, don't forget to actually use people like Danny, who actually, get to the broader audiences out there to listen to, what their feedback is as they see so many more people too. There are wonderful multipliers like that. Danny, thank you very much for being part of this. It's been great.
Thank you, Michael. Mike, thank you, Des.
Thank you.
So, Jenny, I'm looking at, we're right on the hour. I hope we did what you needed us to do for the core. It's great to have the opportunity to have all the core community members here, and particularly the product core today. Look forward to doing more of this with you guys in the future. And thanks again to our special guest, Des, and to Danny for being such a great host too.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.